Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Disney historian and author of the best-selling Wisdom of All book series, Jeff Barnes. Next, Disney's voice actors from cartoons, video games, and Disney attractions and shows, including Toy Story, The Tower of Terror, and The Haunted Mansion, Cressida. Imagineer and current Disney historian, Tom Morris.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. How are we? Well, we have quite the attraction this afternoon as we talk about what is arguably one of everybody's favorite attraction, and we're going to start with Tom, because Tom, you like to dig up favorite facts about the Haunted Mansion, and specifically a time period back when the Haunted Mansion sat empty.
Right.
And specifically, now it was an opening day attraction here at Walt Disney World almost 50 years ago.
Right.
But in California, there was a period of time from 1963 to 1969 where it sat dormant, and it languished, and it waited. And you were a young man at the gates, waiting. And that's where our story starts.
That's right.
So take it away.
And I wasn't the only young man. I thought I might have been the only young man, but in retrospect, there were several people kind of in my camp, and we were all wondering, like, when is this going to open? So we would go to Disneyland. Most families back then went once a year. That was considered normal, and sometimes they went twice a year. And we'd go running up to see if we called it the haunted house, because it wasn't even a sign for the first couple of years. It just sat there, but not even that notification sign that was written by Marty. And so, when is the haunted house going to open? Yeah, that is my lane, I guess you could say.
Your niche?
It's my niche, yes. And there's other historians out there that know a lot more about the Haunted Mansion and all the characters and its post-opening history. But my little thing that I'm interested in is that period of time where it sat and languished, and why did it sit there so long, and what was inside of it while it languished. And in Southern California in the 60s, before the internet, there were rumors. Every neighborhood had some rumor about why that haunted mansion or haunted house at Disneyland hadn't opened. And there were rumors about it being too scary. They opened it, it was too scary, they closed it, they reopened it, it was still too scary, someone had a heart attack in it. These were all rumors, and they were prevalent and consistent rumors. And so I just love that whole period of time. That's why the Haunted Mansion is my favorite attraction, is because it just has that particular attraction element.
And how many of you are here because haunted is your favorite?
So I'm not going to take you through the Ken Anderson version. Those of you who are familiar with Haunted Mansion and know all the history, that's not my segment. There are people that know a lot more about that. And Jason Sorrell, who might be out there, and Jeff Baham, and Kat even knows a lot more about certain aspects of the Haunted Mansion than I do. I'm really obsessed with the Disneyland version that was teased. I mean, we were teased and mentally tortured for 6 years. First the sign appeared, and I was like, ooh, there's going to be a haunted house. And then they handed out this brochure in 1962 that says, yeah, we're going to do this haunted house, it's coming. And then we started seeing promotional artwork for it, like this Sandra Kim sketch, and it even goes back earlier, back to 57 with Ken Anderson. And most of you all know that it's actually based on a house in Baltimore. Who made the decision to pursue that house is still kind of an unknown aspect. This particular drawing here is Marvin Davis' elevation that has recently surfaced, and Marvin has gotten some of the credit for the final iteration of it. But one of the things that I've discovered in my archaeological digging in the last year or so going through all of the construction drawings of the Haunted Mansion, I looked for the names of the people the draftsmen, the lowly draftsmen who did the actual finished drawings. And the guy who did the key elevations for it is right there. His name is Dean Tavalaris, and he's actually still alive. And he was Francis Ford Coppola's production designer on every single Francis Ford Coppola film. Nominated 5 times, and he won Academy Award. And he is the one who did because I'm sure it was because he was identified as the most talented of the draftspeople there. So he would do the key, it's like an animator, he'd do the key drawings, and he did the key elevations. And he may have been the person who changed the cupola on the top from a hexagon, or from a square to a hexagon, but we don't know. He couldn't remember. So anyway, this shows up in 1963, and I'm like, wow, let's go in. No, it's not open yet. It's not ready yet. Next year, soon. So we waited, and we waited, and we waited.
Are you in any of these photos, Tom?
No, but that's my avatar in the red shirt. That's what I would do first trip to Disneyland. Our first thing when we went to Disneyland is I would run to the haunted house. Because that was such an intriguing, notion of, we get to go in a haunted house. And everything at Disneyland was so cool, so this would be the coolest haunted house in the world. And they would even open up the gates sometime for publicity pictures, just, to kind of hint that it's coming, it's maybe next year. All of the souvenir guidebooks would always say, coming next year, coming next year. And finally in 64 or 65, when they realized it's not coming next year, even though they kept saying it was coming next year, they had Marty Sklar write this, notorious and famous sign on the outside, asking for ghosts and to send in your application to the Ghost Relations Department. And yet again, in 1964, 65, but they're still saying next year or soon, implying basically that it's going to be next, it's coming next. And so 65 rolls around, and what are those people doing out in front? And 67 rolls around, and what are those people doing? I mean, they're in the yard of the Haunted Mansion, but it's still 2 years away from opening.
And you need to understand, there isn't even a New Orleans Square at Disneyland at this point. That doesn't open until the summer of 1966.
So, yeah,
And
right.
And so there's this mansion, and it's just sitting there, and it's as if it's calling your name.
Yes, it had my name on it. And it had a lot of other people's names on it. And, as I sat there drooling at the gates of the mansion, I would wonder, what are they doing in there? It must be really great. Whatever it is they're doing in there, it's taking a long time because they want to get it right, and they're, trying to figure out how to make ghosts transparent or whatever. So I was imagining, of course, everything was happening in the house itself. And, but what's interesting, what I have found out, well, let me see, I don't want to go off course here. Let's see what was really going on. So there's the big, wall called it the big hole for New Orleans Square. And on the left is another hole for the haunted house. And so that's really what it looked like until they actually began building the show building for it in 1969 and sat back there like that. So how could there have been, how could it have opened once or twice and been too scary? That was kind of hard to figure out. But there must have been something that spurred those rumors on. So I also became very interested in the whole cultural archaeology or urban archaeology of why that rumor was so persistent. And whenever I had a chance, I'd go through drawings or photographs or memos or whatever to see if there was anything that indicated. And all I could really come up with was, those elevators were inside the mansion the whole time. It was built with the Montgomery elevators, and they had to test those periodically. And so people going in and out, or they would get cast numbers, they'd have to get cast numbers to fully load the elevator to test it. It had to get recertified by the state of California every couple of years, even though it wasn't, actively being used. Another interesting thing here, though, that I think I was able to confirm is there's been rumors about, it was never really intended to be a walkthrough. Disneyland would never do, a walkthrough like that. Well, they had lower attendance back then, so it could have done a walkthrough. But they very much did intend it to be a walkthrough. And here's a plan that's recently been uncovered. I think Chris Merritt found this one. And it very definitely shows, you know, the two elevators and a separate walk-through attraction. In fact, this drawing might have been done by another Academy Award person, you know, working as, you know, temporarily at Imagineering for Walt on Walt's behalf. His name was Carol Clark. He worked on Mary Poppins, and he was asked by Walt to work out, to figure out how to fit a walkthrough.
Well, and people forget this, but Pirates of the Caribbean, before the World's Fair and It's a Small World, was scheduled to be a walkthrough.
That's right.
As well.
That's right. And they didn't really have, you know, a big problem with that, because in this case, with Haunted Mansion, it was two separate haunted mansions, each with 1,200 people an hour. It was actually a pretty high capacity proposition. But of course, you know, later they will come up with the on-the-mover attraction that will render it more of a ride. But the other kind of urban myth that I was able to confirm by going through all of the drawings, or not urban myth, but speculation back and forth, was were there supposed to be two separate walkthroughs, and were they supposed to have separate exits? That showed up in a thread, in one of the threads. Dan was doing one of those. And the answer is yes, there were two separate walkthroughs with two separate exits, graveyard exits. You can see it there in plan, where those exits were going to be. And in reading an early Mark Davis script, he has the ending of the walkthrough, but basically the parting shot from the ghost house is, find your way now, find your way out. So that wasn't intended originally for the stretching room, it was for the end of the attraction, and it would be like a maze-like moment where you had to pick from several doors to get out. And the construction drawings that I saw indicate these three holes in the concrete to get out of the show building. And we may see those in a minute if I can bring this up. Yeah, so this showed up on the internet a couple of years ago, and there's three holes where they're shown on the construction drawings. That was where you would have to try to find your way out and eventually make it into the graveyard. They filled those holes up, of course, later on. Well, one of them is still there. One of them is the exit, the one on the right. And that's actually open to guests right now. It's an alternate way now into the Haunted Mansion because of COVID. So what did it look like back there? It looked like that as it sat for years and years. And there'd be like discarded props and branches from the Swiss Family Treehouse. That's the railroad tunnel up on the upper left. And inside, you know, what was inside? Well, the elevators, in fact, you know, I've asked a lot of my superiors and people who were there, you know, when I was kind of, every now and then I'd show my fanboys at work, and I'd ask Orlando Ferrante or any number of people, you know, were those elevators there? And no, there was nothing in there. It was just empty shell for years, but those elevators were there. I found a photograph that's will be coming up. This is a team of Imagineers. They had just finished enclosing the tunnel with rock work. This may be another reason why rumors started about they're getting ready to open it, because they see a construction crew in there building something in suits walking around, you know. And so this was one time, they did that in '65. There's a picture, a random photo from the Green collection, and you can see the elevator, one of the elevator tabs on the right, the back of it. So they were indeed sitting in there. In fact, I'm going to interview someone who believes he was with a group of press people that were taken down on it. A guy who worked with Marty Sklar, as a matter of fact.
Now, I always tell people that the elevators go 6 feet under.
That's a good idea. That's great.
How far do they actually go down? Do you know?
18 and a half.
18 and a half.
18 and a half at Disneyland. And I don't know how much they rise here, but it's probably the same.
Okay. I like 6 feet under.
Yeah, I would too. This hole in the wall is another one of those holes. That's on the other side. So that hole, they reopened up and used that to put the exit ramp through. And another interesting thing is, in the summer of '66, they used it as a parade halfway, what do we call it? not parade storage, but the parade would go up Main Street and through Frontierland, and then it would sit there for 3 or 4 hours until the next parade. So there'd be people back there, and there were lockers in there for the entertainment people inside the cavity of the Haunted Mansion. You can see like some of the parade floats in there. So that's another potential source of rumor mongering for the mansion. And but finally, it wasn't until 1969, the beginning of 68, they decided finally we're going to do this, and they decided they'd do it with an omnimover based on the ultimate success of the omnimoovers on the interstates attraction in Tomorrowland. And that decision was not made until late '67, or probably more like middle of '68. They built this, and once they decided to do it, it was less than a year, just like It's a Small World. Once they decided they were really, really going to do it, the building didn't even go up until, this is February of 1969. And it's going to open in, 7 months? 6 months?
Mid-August of '69.
6 months it's going to open, and they don't start the building until then.
And do you have any awareness that it's going to be a show building behind the berm and separate from the facade that you've been looking at?
Yeah, Sam the Cam ruined it for me. This map, or Colin Campbell, one of them, by showing that
Right.
on the map, on the souvenir map. So I was kind of clued into that part of it. So there was never a time where I thought the whole ride was in the mansion itself.
Because even today, when I talk in Southern California, people are shocked. They think the Haunted Mansion is the facade, and they have no clue that the stretching room is an elevator, and the entire purpose is to get them under the railroad track, beyond the berm, and into that show building that technically sits outside the park.
Yeah, they're spatially challenged.
Yeah.
And it's like breaking the magic.
Yeah. So here's another shot. This is like in March, the building is still not enclosed. And now we're into like April and May, and the building still isn't completely enclosed. I like to do these little before and after shots from time to time. So this is a shot taken kind of in the middle of the haunted portrait, hallway, looking towards the loading area, and I did a little overlay. In the background is going to be in the back on the right is the ballroom and the balcony for the ballroom. And then I did a little overlay just to show you there in the building that picture was taken from. It was very big like that. And finally it opened. Yay!
And when did you finally get to storm those gates?
I didn't do it until October of that year. And I wasn't aware that it was finally opening until the local news mentioned it, like just a couple days before.
And was it everything that you dreamed of?
Yeah, I think I would have preferred it to be a walkthrough, because that's what was in my mind, was that you walk through it and you get to open up doors and stuff. But yeah, it blew me away. The ballroom and the singing ghosts and Adam Rayota. By the way, throw away those problems on my paper route, so that was bizarre. Here's another little trivia thing. I don't remember it, but apparently those plaques were originally shiny brass. And they're not, they weren't the patinaed plaques that we're familiar with today.
Right.
But there's more. Wait, there's more. Okay, so here's a revelation. This is something I just figured out a few days ago as the result of a drawing I found last month from the daughter of the architect who did these drawings. So that painting there is her drawing it. Her painted that as the concept, the first concept for the Haunted Mansion for Florida. This has been published before. And it's a Federalist style building. And it wasn't, I don't know if it was known what date this was done. It may not have been dated, but now that I know what I know, this seems to be from early or mid 1967, when they just started designing. I mean, they weren't doing much for the design of Walt Disney World at that time. They were doing all the infrastructure design and figuring out where they could put stuff where it wouldn't sink into the muck. So the first thing that was ever done was the castle in this design, and the second thing by the same person was the Haunted Mansion along with Herbie. So Herbie did that painting, but this was the first architectural drawing ever done for the haunted house. It's similar to some others that have appeared online, but it's earlier than those. This is the summer of '67 and the autumn of '67 when this is designed. And it is designed as a walkthrough, what I figured out, because of the way, because of the elevational changes that are indicated on it. There's another elevation here. So these were from the daughter of a guy named Ted Rich, who no one's heard of. He just happened to design the castle here at Walt Disney World with Herbie Ryman. So Herb and Ted were kind of a team, and they had worked together at MGM and probably at 20th Century Fox before they were at Disney. And so Ted did this, and his daughter has these drawings that apparently Imagineering doesn't have. And it really does tell the story of when this was first conceived, and the fact that if they were doing this in the summer of '67, they just opened Adventure Through Inner Space. So they hadn't decided that. In fact, omnibus were having a problem for 2 or 3 months, like every new ride system does. So
Yeah.
I'm sure they would not have made a decision at that early stage that it would be an omnibus or attraction. So Walt Disney World's Haunted Mansion did go through a brief phase as being a walkthrough, just like Disneyland's.
Right.
And yeah.
And the Haunted Mansion is the only attraction that was created simultaneously for both Disneyland and Walt Disney World. They built 2 of everything and then just set everything aside for Orlando and shipped it down here later for the opening in 1971.
And it was the first attraction completed here.
Interesting.
Yeah. It was dust-free and sealed up and turnkeyed, a year before the park opened.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. All right.
And that was my section of it.
There you go.
I don't think there's another slide. We'll see. It's not advancing. Come on. Here we go. Oh, yeah, I just wanted to throw that in there. Because I've been talking about a house and a mansion. But that's not what the important thing about the Haunted Mansion is. It's the people and the characters and the spirits that inhabit it. So that's my transition.
All right.
To this Cressida to talk about its most famous and notorious occupant.
So to advance it, I just hit the...
Oh, yes, that green button. Only hit the green button.
Okay, so, well, that was phenomenal. I'm so excited. That was way beyond the pizza that we had. I cannot tell you how amazing this is to be here, not just for the awesome history that Tom's very fond of with this particular room, but years and years and years and years ago, when I was a tot, I actually was in this same auditorium, not knowing this history, but for something else. And just looking at the people talking about the history of the park, and never thought in a million years that I would be here. So dreams do come true. Believe it, and it can happen to you too. And I'm really happy to be sharing this moment with you. So now that I've fanned out, people often ask me how, when did the bride start? How did the bride start? Wasn't it cool that they decided to add, a real bride? And what I find fascinating is that from the moment Walt had the idea of creating a park, from the moment there was going to be a Mickey Mouse park or any version of such, there was always a mansion. Always. And I don't know what happened in Walt's childhood that actually prompted him to always want a haunted house. But thank goodness he did want one. Thank goodness that he wanted one.
Because he said people like to be scared. How many of you like to be scared?
And fascinatingly enough, there was always a bride. The bride story, of many different versions of a bride story, was always part of the mansion. In fact, it was the central figure of the mansion. She came in many iterations. The doomed bride was probably the most prevalent, certainly the one that I heard the most about growing up. My dad, who worked with the Imagineers, would share this story of the doomed bride, which ironically ended up being very similar to what the opening of the Haunted Mansion movie was. The version I heard was the gothic doomed love story. And let's see, there's a few more beautiful beautiful pieces of a doomed bride wondering what happened to her lost love. And there's, of course, other famous versions. These are Ken Anderson, Mark Davis, and other Imagineers, which, of course, have not gotten the credit that they deserve for the original renderings of this bride. I particularly love the drawing on the right. You can see that there's a tour guide there for the walkthrough version who's dressed like a milkman. That was really cast member uniform. But that's one of my favorites.
Nothing will ruin a love story.
Like a milkman. I'm telling you. And then, of course, there was always other versions, which was a scary bride. This is one of my favorites. And this was the portraiture that was going to change. So she would go from being innocent to actually wielding an axe. Is it changing for them right now? Do we have that
No,
one?
once the next one, we'll see.
There we go. Isn't that awesome? Of course, stretching room portrait versions that did not happen. And then eventually, one day, many years later, they decided, of course, to bring back some version of a main character, a lead character. And I think it's perfectly wonderful they decided to be a female character, and that it would be the bride that would manifest in the attic as the main character. And this was Chris Runco who created that beautiful image, which of course ended up being sort of the fabulous final rendering of what Constance might eventually be. What often is asked of me, and that I think is a fabulous Easter egg that got hidden in the mansion, is of course the early version, or the early version from the early mansion, which is a tie over to the current Constance. And that is this publicity photo that was taken for a movie. Let's see if that looks familiar to anybody. Yeah, that would be our lovely lady of the stretching room. And that, of course, was Constance in her later years, as when she retired from all of her beheading. So that's the history of the bride and how she became the current bride. I just want to share that with you guys, and thank you so much to Tom for helping me put that together.
And now, Kat, I know you have a multifaceted history in terms of your connection and background with Disney. Share with us a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, my father, as I mentioned, worked with Imagineering, did a lot of marketing, sort of in the early 70s, mid-70s. And that was right, of course, as Disney World had first opened. And I would accompany him almost every weekend while he was coming down to the park. And I got dragged backstage a lot, got shown all kinds of things that most 4-year-olds probably weren't getting to see, which was how they put together the animatronics. And it was in the panel yesterday, I talked a little bit about that experience and how I got to see both the onstage and the backstage. And so very early on, I came to understand that this tremendous storytelling that was going on in the attractions wasn't just pure luck or coincidence. It actually was a lot of hard work by a lot of incredibly talented craftsmen. And it was a real eye-opener from an early age that if you wanted to create that kind of magic, it was going to take a fair amount of work. And it would take a lot of development and brainstorming, a lot of great heads put together to create it. And then as I sort of grew up and became more enamored of the Disney attractions and the park, I decided I wanted to become a cast member, which thrilled my parents because we lived nowhere close to the park. So I was forbidden to do it, forbidden. And I went ahead and took all my babysitting money and bought like the crappiest stick shift you could possibly find and drove the 5 freeway twice a day so I could become a cast member. And actually my first voiceover gig was Storybook Land. So that was really cool.
And for you, as either a child, a teenager, or maybe even when you were working as a cast member, where was the Haunted Mansion for you in terms of favorite attractions?
Well, Pirates and Mansion were among my favorite attractions. I think Peter Pan's Flight was up there too. I didn't really have a differentiation between those three for a long time. They were my favorites. and they sort of represented how Disney Imagineering can transport you into a completely different place, just like a great movie does. It sucks you right in, and of course, were immersive experiences way before there were computers and CGI. And I was terrified of the mansion. You guys heard that yesterday too, and that if anybody was anybody there yesterday? Okay, yeah. All right, so I don't have to tell all of this all over again, but I was terrified of the mansion when I was a tot, because my dad loved to sort of build up this gothic Edgar Allan Poe. I mean, I thought it was going to be, unlike Tom, I was the complete opposite. I did not want to have anything to do with it. And would stand in that line and I would stare at this edifice, which was, you know, scary to me because of the stories he was saying while we were online. And he would point to the cupola and to the weather vane. Did you know why the weather vane is a ship? And he sort of grilled and tested on my Disney trivia from way back when. And it wasn't until I was in my late teens that I relaxed enough to finally really just enjoy the mansion. Up until I was 12, I was still going through it like this. I didn't want to see anything. And I think what was building up in my imagination was probably much scarier than what was going on outside of it. And once I saw the ballroom, I was just like blown away that it was so beautiful and like gothic in a beautiful romantic way. So that was sort of, I fell in love with it strong then.
I'm impressed that you used the word edifice. Like, I'm trying to picture this small child outside the haunted mansion with her father and thinking of the word edifice.
Well, remember, he was teaching me Imagineering, so I think I was
Exactly.
picking up this terminology from very early. I probably knew the word audio animatronics way before any of my peers did.
So how much of your father's influence in this entire experience do you think propelled you into a career in voice acting?
I think Disneyland was always the driving factor, even though I didn't consciously know it. And that's a great question. But when I finally was sort of in my college years at UC Berkeley, I was taking a lot of theater craft and a lot of theater design classes. And a lot of the things we were learning, scrims and backlighting and how to sound effects and how you could forward them and backward paste them and make it creative. It sort of woke up in my brain, these are a lot of the illusions and a lot of the things that we see in the Haunted Mansion, and that was fascinating to me. It's interesting that I never, despite all of the early Imagineering messaging, which I think he was trying to push me towards, I never actually wanted to become an Imagineer, but I did want to become a part of the park, desperately. Which is, of course, with a lot of cast members, that's why we became cast members, was we wanted to be a part of the magic. Again, never did I dream I would be actually part of the magic, but I was tape recording on one of those little early carry tape recorders. What were those called?
Panasonic.
Yeah, they were like the rectangles.
Yeah.
I was literally recording the attractions. Nobody stopped me. Back then, they weren't nearly as proprietary or concerned about stuff like that, but I was recording them and sending them at home.
Yeah.
And I think that hearing the voices, Thurl Ravenscroft, Paul Frees, I love Paul Frees from Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln. I was just so enamored of the tonality and the pace and the way that he would structure the phrases. I think that obviously planted a deep, deep love towards it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I would argue, yeah, you were part of the magic, but today you are part of the park, right? Because you go into the Haunted Mansion and you're there, which is amazing and part of the legacy. And so to that end, I'm going to ask a question, and then I've got one more for you. When it comes to this particular job or gig, did you go find Disney or did Disney come find you? And I know I asked you this backstage,
Yeah.
but I think it's interesting, and it might be something that the audience wants to hear.
So they held auditions. They held wide auditions for this. This had been brewing for a while. Once the Pirates transformation adding Jack Sparrow was a success and come off well, then they progressed on to developing other classic attractions, figuring out what they could do. And of course, the attic was always something that was a bit in limbo, I think we would say is the polite way to, it just didn't yet have a full character, the way the other rooms in the mansion had a full, amazing character. and was sort of on hold in a sense. And as they were developing this character, Chris Houston, who was the show director that I met and was most closely associated with, she had said to the casting person, it would be so great if the way that the character is embodied feels like it was always there. Could actually trick a few guests into wondering if maybe it had always been there and they maybe had missed it. Of course, you know, true guests would never miss something like that. But they wanted it to feel like it had always been there and wasn't just like slapped on at the last moment. And in that thinking, they were wondering about what the voice might sound like. Should it sound completely different from the other female voices in the mansion, or something completely separate? And I think that was in the back of their mind when they did the casting. Because I got brought in, and again, as you folks got to hear yesterday, when I got brought into the casting hall, it was at Imagineering, the legendary, you know, Flower Street building. I signed the NDA. I signed a second NDA. They handed me the script, which was fascinatingly, bizarrely just wedding vows. I've never gotten a script like that in my life, or an audition. And basically was brought in, was told, well, you're probably wondering what you're doing here. And I said, yeah, the gals out there all look like beautiful blonde Barbies. I'm not exactly sure what, how can I help? And I was doing on camera back then, so it wasn't completely out of the question, but I did look different from everybody else. And I said, well, we're kind of playing with this idea, and we've loved your voice on a couple of other things that you've done, and we're kind of toying with this idea, and this is, what we're going to be doing is sort of towards a classic attraction. Think classic Disneyland. And they kept hitting the word classic attractions. And eventually they said, we'd love to hear what you would do with this, thinking towards classic attractions. And I just stared at these lines going, well, am I allowed to ask any questions about the character? Because they're very on the hush-hush, it's all NDA, need-to-know basis. And I was just told, you know, we'd love to hear what you do with them. And so I read it out loud, thinking classic, it's gotta be pirates, right? Or mansion, not Bear Country, Bear Country, it's like,
Yeah, that had been asked a long time ago.
asked, exactly. And so finally, I started to spin the lines a little bit, just to give it something different, because an actor, you're sort of thinking, what could I do different that nobody else is going to do? And I want to meet those Barbies out there. I really want to get this, whatever it is. And that was all. That was the first one. And then the next audition, the callback, then Chris said, we're going to share something with you. It is a classic attraction. I can't tell you which one yet, but it is one of the classic attractions, and we're thinking of adding something to it, and the character is going to be a bride. So thinking that, what would you do with these lines? And by the way, would you mind holding this baseball bat? And they handed me a baseball bat. Just stand there with the baseball bat. It was like I was like, is this a test? What kind of a candid camera is this? And basically I was just holding the baseball bat. And so I figured, okay, it's a weapon. And I'm saying wedding vows. So it's some sort of, she's not totally benevolent, this character. And I spun the lines a little bit more, and they really liked it. And they said, yes, yes, at the end of every single vow, just give it a little twist, a little wink, a little hint towards something. And somehow I found this cadence, or this way of doing it, and everybody was really happy. But now I had started to realize that it was probably the mansion. Like something new just on a gut level. And now I was flipping out, because they really were gonna add a character to the classic mansion. I would never forgive myself if I didn't book it. Like, how could you get that close to something that amazing and not? And as an actor, you're supposed to just leave everything to the door, just move on to your next audition. No way was that happening. And then on the final callback, they did say, it's for the mansion, it's a bride, and we'd really like, just as if this is going to be it, what would you do with these lines? And I don't really remember that callback, because I was so terrified I wouldn't give them what they wanted. I so wanted to be part of it. So that's kind of how that all came about.
But weren't you confused by the baseball bat?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It, of course, was a stand-in for the acts, and I guess the idea was just, we want an actor to improvise with it and figure out what they might. I think all I ended up doing was just sort of, it was just there. So so I didn't really do much with it, but it was a very interesting moment. I'm not sure, ultimately, they knew it was going to be an axe, but I guess they didn't want to give away to me what was going on with it, so.
So, you got a room full of Haunted Mansion fans. If you could tell them one more thing, what should they know? One more fact, one more piece of trivia, what would you want to share with them?
Is that a trick question?
It's a final question.
I'd probably say to you, why don't you throw it out to them and ask them what they're dying to know that maybe has not been shared yet about Constance?
All right. Any Constance questions out there?
It's not really a Constance question, but it's more a generalized question. Between the Disneyland version or Disney World version, which mansion is superior in both of your opinions?
I'm not touching that one.
And I think I know Tom's answer, and we'll let Kat think about it.
Oh, which one is superior or scarier?
Superior.
Either one.
Superior. The Walt Disney World attraction is superior, but
I disagree.
But I still like the exterior of Disneyland's, because that's the one that I ruled over. But I really appreciate the, especially knowing what I know now about the history of the one here. But I think the attraction here, it's longer.